Today I'm speaking to author, journalist, teacher, and writer Ariel Gore, who has just published her new book, Hexing the Patriarchy, 26 Potions, Spells, and Magical Elixirs to Embolden Resistance. Welcome.
Thank you.
So to start, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit what a hex is, as in hexing the patriarchy, and where that term comes from.
Well, I mean, the term hex actually originally is more related to hag and meant just a witch or a comedian or a slut. Basically, anybody the patriarchy doesn't like, they were called a hex. And then the term kind of evolved to mean more specifically someone who's practicing witchcraft, and then more specifically kind of a negative spell. So, you know, we might say like there are healers and there are hexers. So the healers are going to focus on healing themselves and people in their community, and the hexers are going to focus on, you know, putting the patriarchs and the rapists and the capitalists out of business. And in this book, we use the term kind of more neutrally or positively, and then sometimes negatively too. It's a spell that is cast kind of to affect change.
Mm-hmm. Your book contains 26 potions, spells, and magical elixirs. Can you give us some example of some of these spells we could use to smash the patriarchy?
Yes. And they're all contributed by different magical makers and brujas and witches and orishas. So people from all types of magical traditions contributed their different spells. So one of them is justice jars, and you can bottle up your rage with broken glass and vinegar and all kinds of things, and bury these jars maybe on the route of a white supremacist march or something like that to disempower their agenda. There's a spell for instructions for making puppets. And so you can literally make a dolly of a rapist or a person who is abusing their power and stick pins in it. And that tradition is more kind of widely known as voodoo dolls, but it also comes to us from European traditions of magic. It's interesting when you start looking at all the different magical traditions that there are a lot of cross-cultural traditions that people have used all over the world. You know, some of the hexes are kind of more unexpected, where, you know, someone will make a playlist to empower themselves when they have to go meet with a social worker or some other representative of the patriarchy, and, you know, to just embolden themselves. And I like those contributions a lot as well, because you don't really think of that as like, oh, this is witchcraft, but that is what everyday witchcraft looks like for a lot of practitioners. There's a growl spell just about starting your own band as a cover for your coven, which is kind of cool. And again, something that you don't necessarily think of as magical, and yet songs are spells, right? There's Priestess of Yamaya contributed a ritual that really anyone can do. Her tradition is initiatory, but she knew that this book was going to be out there for everyone. And so she specifically contributed a ritual that's open to both initiates and non-initiates, or people who are just kind of trying out different kinds of magic. All the spells in the book were really geared towards everyone. So it's not like, oh, you can't do this because it's, for whatever reason. All the spells are for everyone.
How did you go about collecting all of these spells from different traditions?
Well, I got to say, after the 2016 election specifically, pretty much everyone I knew who had any kind of magical training was reinitiating themselves, dusting off their magic wand. Maybe people who had been, never taking a break, were really moving in a more hardcore direction with their political magic. And so it was, quite easy to reach out to a lot of witches that I either knew or was acquainted with in some way. And then I also travel a lot and, was specifically looking for people who wanted to contribute something. There's a Thai witch who grew up practicing Thai witchcraft, but is more just personally drawn to Western witchcraft, and he wanted to contribute a spell that includes runes, and it's a spell that he and his colleagues used to protect themselves during some political violence in Bangkok. And so really I've kind of, cast a pretty broad net in terms of inviting people to contribute a spell. And then a lot of times it would actually, some kind of magical thing would happen. Like I did a residency at this Aquarian lab / witch store in Minneapolis called The Future, and wrote a lot of the book there and collected a lot of the spells while I was doing that residency. And I was coming to the end of the residency and the end of writing the book, and I didn't have a spell for Z, and in walked Zion, who is part of the Portland School of Astrology. And so I was like, Zion, your letter is Z, write about the zodiac. So coincidence and research and just talking to all the witches that I knew who were really amping up their practice to do some social justice work.
So I want to talk a little bit about hexing and its association with curses. So I have heard it said that if you curse somebody or you put a curse on somebody, the power of that will come back to you. Either I've heard 3 times, I've heard 100 times. And so I think that would make people hesitate to...
Right. Some people subscribe to that belief, and there are, throughout the hexes in the book and the spells in the book, there's sometimes a reference to that. Like, if you believe in that, don't hex a specific person, but rather an ideology. Or what my position is with that is, don't hex anyone if you wouldn't sign off on the same punishment for your son or your cat. It's not going to, if you say, like, I'm binding rapists, well, it's only going to come back to you if you're starting to abuse your power, and then you will be bound from that maybe. So it's something I don't really worry about, and in my experience, it's not true. But of course, you do want to be careful about just kind of willy-nilly hexing, your roommate who you're mad at for, taking the cap off the toothpaste or something. It's something to think about deeply and to consider. And a lot of the spells in the book actually are by people who are much more hesitant to kind of hex their oppressors, and so the spells are more about, protecting your own heart, or, protecting your own community, or empowering families who are in transition, or things like that, where the work does feel kind of more positive. But, it's also true that throughout history, people have survived by sometimes hexing their oppressors. And so there is a survival magic involved.
What do you mean by magic? You write at the beginning of the book that all pre-capitalist societies believed in magic.
Yes.
So what is magic?
Well, magic is, in one thing, if we think about it as a sort of an anti-capitalist thing, is that you get something without having to have your labor exploited. So you might cast a spell to get your rent money together. And so you're doing that outside of the capitalist system. Magic is working with the unseen and creating the effect that you're looking for. So whether it's spells or something that just kind of happens that seems to be unexpected or kind of works for in that classical capitalist training that we have that says, work hard and you'll have a good life, which, we found that that's not really true, that most of the hardest working people are poor, and most of the people who don't work at all are the wealthy. So it turns out that that's not true. So magic is just a way of working with the unseen and working with your resources. And it doesn't mean that you don't also do things in the physical world. So you might cast a spell of protection around yourself and your fellow street protesters, and you will still go out and do your street protest, or you will still go to court on behalf of people more marginalized than yourself. So you're still doing work in the seen world, but it's being kind of bolstered by this energetic focus. I think of magic as a way of focusing personal power for the greater good.
How did you get started doing magic? Would you talk a little bit about your journey, how you discovered this?
Yeah, I was brought up by my stepdad was a excommunicated Catholic priest who saw his spirituality as very much aligned with social justice issues. And so that was my background, was that politics and kind of lefty politics and spirituality were friends. And a lot of my friends and colleagues didn't grow up with that. They grew up with religion equals, someone trying to control you and someone trying to take away your spiritual authority. And so that was never my association with the spiritual world. But I initiated myself as a witch when I was 21. I was a single mom. I was surviving on welfare. It was the middle of the family values campaign. Family court was making my life living hell. And so there was all these factors that I felt like I had no control over. And I was just learning about feminism, and feminism pretty much led me directly to witchcraft. And it was a way of taking that power back. I mean, the cool thing about magic and witchcraft, and I want to say that, you don't have to believe or anything new to practice magic. You don't have to renounce your other religious affiliations to practice magic. But with witchcraft or any type of magic, there's always something you can do. So, if you need to get your rent money together, there's a spell for that. If you need to psych yourself up for, walking into a situation where what the patriarchy's doing to you, what their tactic is to rob you of your confidence and your sense of worth, you can build that back up. And so that was really appealing to me, as opposed to a more kind of hierarchical religion that would say, if you follow these rules and basically smile in the face of your own oppression, maybe you'll go to heaven someday. And so that worldview didn't work for me at all. And what worked for me was really learning how to focus energy and, number one, transcend my own training as a, white, person living on occupied land, as a person who was trained to believe that capitalism was going to do something for me. So to transcend that, but also to find my own power again, and to be like, yeah, this is my family, and this is what it looks like, and we're going to survive.
You talked about feminism and it leading you directly to witchcraft. Could you talk a little bit about what the connection is between feminism and witchcraft for you?
Sure. And, not that every feminist is a witch, but I think that the politics of feminism is intrinsically connected to the politics of kind of the witch archetype. Historically, the witch burnings and genocides and trials were about disempowering women. So it was about enforcing misogyny, and it was about making way for capitalism. And so it makes kind of perfect sense that when we're trying to undo misogyny, we come to witchcraft. When we're trying to undo capitalism, we come to witchcraft. All of these magical traditions are also very earth-based. And so environmentalism also, leads to a lot of these pagan traditions. For me, the witch archetype, and talking about when I was first initiated myself, was about, I can be the head of a household. Like, I don't need to be married, and those kinds of things that, are sort of no duh to me now, but I was getting a lot of pushback for not calling my family broken, or things like that. I have the authority to be the head of my household. That was my choice, and it was a valid choice, and female power is not a scary thing. And so kind of coming into all that feminism teaches us, often in a more secular way, was finding the spirituality that went along with that. And, in those, time I'm talking about, when I was in my early 20s, it was the early 90s. I was living in Northern California. And so there was a community of kind of eco-feminist witches. And it was very easy to find people practicing witchcraft, to find like women in spirituality conferences, or, the Mother Peace Tarot. All that was kind of going on in my geographical community. And even though I was fairly introverted and didn't, move in these large circles, the resources were there, and so that was really helpful to me. And then later, I moved back down to the Bay Area where I was from originally, and the magic that I came into contact there was tended to be more Orisha based and was much more from a West African origin. And then in later years, I lived in Portland, where people were practicing more European-based mysteries. And then even more recently, I started getting into spiritualism, which is an American tradition that started in the 1840s here in the U.S. So that's something that more of my immediate ancestors were part of. And so, if you think of like your grandma with her Ouija board, or people doing seances, and a lot of them actually identified as Christians, but these were magical traditions that they were involved in.
You talk about magic as not just about influencing physical realities or outcomes, but also about retrieving the energy that patriarchy has taken from us. How does magic or magical spells help us to take our energy back?
Well, if our training in patriarchy or, in globalism in general is, if you're not making money, you're not good enough. If we don't, if capitalism doesn't say you're good enough, you're not good enough. And so we get in the habit, I think, a lot of times of handing our power over to those ideas. And that's part of the scam. And so I think a huge part of witchcraft and magic in general is about reclaiming that power and refusing to hand our power off indiscriminately. And so a lot of the spells in the book, like you were talking about, hexing, and that some people do feel uncomfortable with it, and that's fine. And it's okay to examine, well, where is that discomfort coming from? Is it coming from the patriarchy? Is it something I need to let go of, or am I just uncomfortable with hexing magic? And if you are just uncomfortable with it, it's absolutely not required. But these things where you're reclaiming your own power and kind of refocusing in your own spiritual authority are so important. I mean, even if, how when you walk into a meeting, if you're walking in feeling incredibly confident, that has a magical effect. It changes the dynamic in an unseen way. Whereas if you're walking into a meeting thinking, oh my gosh, I'm as ugly as they've told me, I'm overweight, and that's bad. And all the sort of negative things that are pushed on us to get us into a kind of already defeated state when we walk in. And I just feel like magic has helped me tremendously with shifting my internal power, which just shifts the energy in the room. It doesn't mean that I necessarily prevail in every circumstance, but it certainly increases my chances of prevailing if I am controlling the energy around me, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. One last question. You describe writing as your go-to conjure method, and you also talk about the ways in which you work with hidden worlds involving use of language, music, and symbolism. Could you talk a little bit about how these are ways to conjure magic?
Yes, I mean, I think that writing can be a spell. I mean, I wrote a novel called We Were Witches, in which I consciously kind of went back. It's like half memoir, half novel, and I consciously went back to a lot of different scenes in my own history and kind of gave my character more power, or maybe gave my character more of a witness. So it wasn't like in the story, the bad things didn't happen, but I maybe let the moon wink at me when they were happening, or something like that in the story. And so by doing that, I kind of created a spell that went back into all those scenes and kind of took back whatever energy or power that I had left there. That was my idea. And I felt like it worked.
So you were rewriting your past.
Yeah. And it was a very healing thing for me to do. In other ways, I'll often use more of the unseen sort of to get me ideas. Like I'll use tarot cards to plot a story, or to find out what happens to a character next. Or I use a lot of automatic rating techniques. There's one technique in the book that is under the letter I, under infinite intelligence, and that's a very spiritualist exercise for contacting people who have passed on. So whether it's your own ancestors or someone else, and using techniques like that to talk about a writing project, or to learn stories that maybe somebody who's passed on would like to see told. I teach a magical writing class, and one of the writers in that class currently was talking about, I am a writer, I am an artist because of my ancestors who couldn't do that. And I thought that was a cool way to think about it. So it's not like she's telling their stories exactly, but the fact that she has the emotional and social opportunity to be a writer is partly she sees that as a tribute to her ancestors who didn't have that opportunity. So I think there's kind of a million ways to work with magic as a writer or as an artist. And honestly, as a writer, I need magic. The publishing industry is so harsh, and the world I live in is often so artist that I seriously need magic to just keep being a working writer.
What do you hope people will take away from reading this book?
Well, I hope that they will hex the patriarchy and we will get rid of the system once and for all. I also think that it's just really healing to be able to do something. A lot of us, if these political times are causing us to be depressed, or maybe we used to be more street protesters and now we're kind of at home with the curtains drawn. And what can we do to kind of pick up our morale and remember that we're all in this together, and that there are a lot of us who are really on the same page and are drawing on all our resources, that both, magical, practical in all the ways. We've got lawyers going to court. We're each doing our own little thing. And so to just, remember that there are a whole bunch of us, and we're going to be okay.
I am Suzanne LaGrande, and today my guest has been journalist, teacher, and writer Ariel Gore, talking about her new book, Hexing the Patriarchy, 26 Potions, Spells, and Magical Elixirs to Embolden Resistance. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Get up, get up.